On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Sarah Guidry. She is the head of analytics and data science at LendingTree. We're going to be talking about organizing work and getting that work done. I think a lot goes into deciding how to divide the work to be done, how to plan for it, how to find the right framework to the solution and make sure that you're solving the right problems. I think we're going to dive into a lot of those type topics on this episode. I'm super excited to have you on, Sarah, to talk about this.
Amir, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, before we start, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of LendingTree, but what do you guys do over there?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it simply is we try to connect consumers and lenders together. So we help consumers see options for the financial services products that they are trying to find, whether that be mortgages, which is our bread and butter and really where LendingTree started, or deposit accounts or credit cards. When a consumer is in the market for a financial services product, we connect them to lenders and give them choices in a simple fashion. And we also provide that service to lenders. How do we connect lenders to consumers that match their buy box and match the type of consumer that they are able to provide those services for? So we operate as that marketplace in the middle of the consumers and the lenders.
I'm sure that data science is doing a lot behind the scenes at LendingTree. So I'm sure you've got a lot of work to get done. And we're always talking about the end product. We're always talking about the idea. It seems like we never really deal with the middle, which is where the work has to get done. And the topic of organizing work, I guess, that could mean different things to different people. As a leader in technology, when you think of organizing work, how do you view that? What does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, I think about it in a couple of different ways. Initially, it's really, what are we building first and foremost? You have to understand the product, the end state, and start with the end in mind. Otherwise, you're not going to organize the work effectively. And that oftentimes takes more planning and forethought than we analysts like to invest on the front end. I think it is a discipline to really spend the time to start with the end in mind and then work backwards to understand if this is where I want to end up. These are the things that I need to do along the way in order to get there. And that doesn't just include things that I'm going to do myself. That's going to include groups that I need to partner with. And the more that you uncover that up front, the less likely you are going to end up at the back of some of these priority lists when you need to be at the front, or catching somebody on their heels or catching yourself on your heels on a piece of the puzzle that you're going to need. So the first thing I think about is, what is the product at the end of this? Is this an ad hoc analysis? Is this a model that's going to go in production and do real-time inferencing? Is this a report that's going to get built that the business is going to use over and over again? All of these things look different at the end and therefore require different steps to get there and different stakeholders involved in order to build it. And so that's really the first thing that I would start with.
Absolutely. I guess when you're looking at the stakeholder necessarily doesn't really care about what goes into making the final product. They're worried about, is it going to be done? How fast is it going to be done? And is it going to work the way I want it to work? That's really all they care about for the most part. I mean, how you do it, you can figure that out. When you're working with stakeholders, and I guess within the data space, everybody wants a solution yesterday, because obviously you had mentioned something interesting that I've been thinking about these last couple of weeks. You said that people that can do things for themselves, we're approaching them and saying, we might be able to do it better for you. And within the data world, a lot of that is, hey, before they could go pop out some kind of spreadsheet, some kind of localized database, they could do some stuff to get themselves by, and they still think they can. When you're talking about stakeholder expectation and making sure that you're delivering the right type of value, how do you make sure that, while you're off trying to figure out and organize the work, that the stakeholder isn't like hands in the air, forget this, I'm just going to go and start myself and see what I can do?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And honestly, Amir, I've thought a lot about our first conversation as well. And this idea of analytics as a function hasn't existed for all that long, right? The business user used to be able to do it for themselves, right? Business intelligence used to live in the business. Excel is an incredibly powerful tool when your data fits in 1 million rows or less. But when your data starts to expand beyond 1 million rows, like what truly is business intelligence? It's mining information out of a set of data, right? That's a probably oversimplified explanation of what business intelligence is. Well, in the world of small data, the business could self-serve. They could do that in Excel. They could get to the answers that they needed. As data grew, as big data became a thing, as data lakes evolved, right? As their data infrastructure got more and more complex, the Internet of Things was created, more and more data started getting generated every second of every day. The insights and the possibility of those insights started to expand exponentially. And so the answers the business used to get for themselves are still very critical answers. But now you have to find them in this massive lake of data in order to get there. So the skill set in order to understand that information, in order to uncover those insights, has now shifted. But I think it's shifted a little bit too far, at least in the case that we're experiencing right now. Of big data can get small again. You just have to invest the time up front to make those smaller data sets for the business so that they can still mine those insights. So I think the first thing that you need to do to set stakeholder expectations and to buy yourself time to get to the more difficult insights is to empower the business to get to their straightforward answers like they used to in Excel, right? And so you have to empower your business user to answer their own question and to follow their own train of thought. And so I always like to think about reporting and business intelligence and enabling that for the business user as enabling the user to follow their train of thought. You're not going to answer every question, but you're going to enable them to answer better questions. And the way that you do that is to structure the small data, structure the reports in a way where your users can follow their own train of thought. That's going to do two things. One, that's going to buy you time because some of the simple answers they're going to be able to answer for themselves. So they're going to be a little bit more patient on the complicated ones. Two, it's going to minimize your distractions, right? As an analyst, you're not answering the what I call 1 + 1 = 2 kind of questions. Like, hey, how many users did we have come into the site that were subprime last month? Well, you shouldn't need an analytics professional to answer that question. That's not a super technical question if you've done the legwork to enable the business to self-serve and answer those questions for themselves. That's really part one, is we've got to make sure we're not hoarding the information, right? And that we put the right controls in place. We've put the right definitions in place. We've structured the small data in a way where you don't have to have a complex knowledge of how the data is structured in order to use it effectively. That is thing one. And then thing two is, I like to think about it as iterative delivery. I talk to my team often about this idea that as an analytics organization, we're an internal consultancy, right? We're not some back office shop. It is a consultative role, and I hire for that consultative mindset and that communication skill. It's one of the, I talk about a three-legged stool, but it's one of the legs in the stool that's necessary to be successful in this kind of an analytics environment. And so you have to be in constant contact with your stakeholders to keep them up to date of what you're finding. And if you do that, sometimes they'll help you shift your path. And they'll save you a lot of rework along the way, because if you answer a third of the question for them, even if you haven't answered 100%, that might get their wheels turning. You get a peek inside their minds and what's keeping them awake at night, or what they're thinking about as they think about their business strategy, and you might be able to adapt your analysis along the way. It also demystifies the black box. Nobody wants somebody to go away and say, okay, I'll have this back to you in 6 weeks, and hear nothing along the way. That maybe you get there if you build that trust over time, right? And you've built those relationships over time. But even then, that's not the greatest experience for your client, right? If your client is your internal stakeholder, you have to communicate with them regularly. So that's a piece of the puzzle too, is regular communication and iterative delivery. And then the third is really expectation setting. It is, I think of analytics as investigative journalism, right? You don't always know what you're looking for. And so setting those expectations up front, setting parameters around that communication, around that iterative delivery, being willing to adapt that to the needs of each individual stakeholder and make tweaks along the way to meet them where they are and meet their needs as your clients. All of that becomes a recipe for having the buy-in, having the patience that's needed to really do the intricate analysis to mine the insights that are going to really drive different business decisions.
I think those are fantastic points. And I think the one thing you said at the end, the patience, I think you have to, I guess as I was listening to you and I was thinking, I was like, you really do have to help your stakeholder understand the value they're going to get. So they are going to be patient. Otherwise, why would they wait? And I think a lot of times we try to tell them about the technical brilliance, how it's going to simplify, how it's going to do all these cool and awesome things. But in reality, they just want to know, how does the physical output help them? And they haven't seen the product. We're telling them to envision the product. It's like when, you get a contractor to come out and you want to do landscaping. Just imagine this green here and flowers there. And unless you have that ability to really see through that, I think it's really hard. And I think sometimes, really skilled leaders have a great way of walking stakeholders through that art of the possible. But then also stakeholders have seen the art of the possible as a bill of goods that never get actually shipped. So I think when you look at that and you're looking at organizing work and you're looking at delivering something quickly and valuable, that's got to be important in this dynamic. But also you want it to fit the bigger piece of the puzzle. You don't want to create something quick and dirty that's a win now that you're going to throw away. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what I like to call radical partnership, right? You have to be willing to get into the weeds with your business partners. You have to be willing to walk alongside them in their strategy development and understand what really drives their needs. And so if you can be that radical partner, then you can understand what's really important to them. And you tend to more naturally focus on, you get that sixth sense in a way of being able to focus on the thing that's going to matter to your partner. I think that's a big piece of it. And then I think the other piece of it is doing your homework, or the eat your vegetables work, as I like to call it, on the front end. So similar to enabling the business user to answer their own questions and doing the legwork around business intelligence to eliminate the distractions and buy some of that patience because they can answer their own questions. There's also things about your own day-to-day that you can automate, right? That you can streamline, that you can make yourself more productive in the time that it takes you to deliver the work. And so don't reinvent the wheel. When you're writing your code, right, build it in a way that you anticipate it needing to be repeatable, even when it's an ad hoc process, because 9 times out of 10, you're going to write the code, you're going to present the insights to your business partner. They're going to say, oh, that's great, but can you tell me about that in Michigan, right? I don't want to go through and rewrite all of my code. So if you can start at the beginning, do a little bit of extra legwork up front to make it a repeatable process and build it as if it's going to be one, even when it's not, you anticipate and you almost welcome the iteration with your business partner. And it does something subtle in how you're engaging with them, is you're not like, oh, gosh, now I have to go through and redo this whole analysis just to look at Michigan. Like, why didn't you tell me that on the front end? Your business partner is exploring with you. You're bringing them along on this investigative journey that you're going on. And so set yourself up for success to be able to pivot so that when they come at you with a one-off question, you're not sitting there exacerbated that you have to start all over. You've anticipated that in your partnership, and you've gone into this with a mindset of, I'm a partner in this exploration. I'm not just here to deliver a finished product. I'm here to go on this investigative journey, so to speak, with my business partner.
I actually like the way you phrased that, the investigative journalist, because I think a lot of times that is, I guess, in older times, there was an analyst on the team whose job was to go be the investigative journalist for teams and then come back and be that conduit. We've kind of shifted some of the frameworks and models, and people are not necessarily in those discrete roles. I guess you as a leader, you obviously are talking to peers in other areas, and you're trying to make sure you're doing your own investigative journalistic work, making sure you're seeing what's coming. When you're looking at that, and obviously you're managing a roadmap and you're trying to, set your team up to deliver within their sprints or whatever the iterations they work in, I guess the last thing you want to do is have a surprise where it'll affect the work outlay. And obviously, sometimes you can't stop that. How close of a relationship, or how do you start working with your relationship so that you don't get those surprises? Because that certainly is going to throw off the timing of a lot of things if somebody all of a sudden says, "Hey, drop everything and I need this." Unless it's a true emergency, obviously, that's a whole different.
Yeah, no, I think there's always a couple of pieces to that answer. It's never one track to a solution. I would say first and foremost, don't plan to 100% of your capacity, right? You have to, there will inevitably be the ad hoc question, the competitor that suddenly overtook you in the Google auctions that you need to adapt to and figure out how you can overtake them. So I would say first and foremost, don't plan to 100% of your capacity. Plan for a little bit of breathing room. That doesn't mean under promise, right? That means be realistic in how much you promise. Understand that your analysts are going to take vacation. The data is not always going to be as easy to find and manipulate as you expect to. AWS is going to have an outage and you're not going to be able to access your data for 4 hours on a given day, right? There's going to be things that happen, or your business partner is going to have an ad hoc request that you didn't plan for. So I would say thing one is don't plan for 100% of your team's capacity. Whatever system, if you're Kanban, if you're agile, whatever you're using, be adaptable. Thing two is regular prioritization discussions. And so we actually, again, back to this idea of radical partnership, I have a centralized function, and certain business partners I know would feel much more comfortable if they controlled the analysts, right? They had the reporting lines, but when it sits in a centralized function, there's a lot of trust involved that I'm going to provide the level of service and the speed of service that my business partners need, even though they don't have direct reporting lines over the resources that are delivering it. And so we have to get creative and be really intentional about how we partner and how we communicate. So my team in particular has weekly prioritization calls, and the GM of the vertical has carte blanche ability to restack our to-do list for the given week or given sprint. And so when something changes, they're in control. When you keep that regular communication, the pivots are less painful, right? You're not like going happily down your merry path and all of a sudden, wham, out of nowhere, you've got to change in direction. You're providing updates to the partners along the way of where the work stands in those prioritization calls, and you're allowing for them to have control over the adjustments. And what that also does is it opens up the dialogue to say, okay, John, I understand you want to pivot and you want to do project X over here. Let me just show you the things that are going to shift. Are you comfortable with that? Are you comfortable with project Y? Now it's going to take us a week longer, and I'm going to show you exactly why. You're going to see on my Kanban board exactly what's going to move around and why it needs to move. And so that transparency to the business partners puts them in control. And what I have found is when they see the trade-offs and when they're in control of making them, they make them less often because they have the insight. It's no longer a black box. So the more you can take away this wall of not understanding the complexity of what's happening, not understanding the decisions that are made, openly communicating and partnering well, it ends up being reciprocal, right? And it ends up being a dialogue. And then it's not this conversation of, well, gosh, I didn't deliver you this other thing because you threw this thing over here at me. Everybody's on the same page and aware of the working model, aware of the trade-offs, and we're making them together, and we're empowering the people making the decisions, running the P&L to make those trade-off decisions, which I think is the right way to do it.
That's a fantastic dive. I love the insights. I love the view of how to mitigate and worry about unexpected changes. I guess one question when it comes to that, when you're looking at your own roadmap, and obviously you're looking at the impact to your team and you're looking at the workload, you said obviously leave a little capacity. When it comes to, let's say, the R&D side of data, where you're trying to tinker and see where you could take advantage of new, data science models, new technologies, how do you weave that in as well? Because obviously, software engineering does hackathons to kind of allow people to do this exploratory component, and they build that into the work to deliver. They have time set aside. So I guess for your team, or how you viewed the data world, obviously it could be a hackathon, but how do you help and keep the space open on your team's calendar to explore and learn and do R&D?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a couple of tactics we've used, some to more success than others. The first thing we implemented was what we call Focus Friday. So it was 4-hour block on everybody's calendar where it was go explore the hunch that's been tickling the back of your brain, go take a new training, go catch up on your email, right? But it's a time for you to go heads down. The entire analytics org has Focus Friday blocked. So at least analytics people aren't putting time on your calendar. So it helps to preserve that block. And then empowering my team and making it okay for them to request a reschedule. It's not going to work every time, but sort of teaching that professional courtesy of like, listen, like my calendar is important too. And I'm at least going to ask the question if I can continue to preserve this Focus Friday because it adds value. So that's one thing that has been successful on the team is this idea of Focus Friday. And it doesn't have to be Fridays, but Fridays for us just tend to be typically lighter meeting days in general. So it was a less of a hill to climb to preserve a 4-hour block to dig in. We have explored the idea of hackathons. We've done them informally in the past. And my leadership team and I were just talking earlier this week about getting them reinitiated or re-implemented within the team. And we were talking strategically about how we do that. Do we need people in person? Can we do it virtually? Well, if we require them in person, we're less likely to have them every quarter because that takes a whole lot more coordination. So let's set one up that can work in both environments. Let's strive for in person, but let's not lock ourselves into it. Let's also time it in a way where it's 4 to 6 weeks before our quarterly planning, so that if an idea comes out of the hackathon, it then feeds into our quarterly planning process and it gets assessed for its value alongside everything else that was already on the list. So there's room for the new ideas. The last thing we do, and I cannot take credit for this, our product leader, Owen, brought this when he joined LendingTree about a year ago. And it's a product concept that we apply to all of our prioritization. And it's the idea of a must-go list, right? So a must-do, should do, could do, won't do. And we've adapted it a little bit. We focus primarily on must-do and should do. Could do to me in a given quarter means you're just not going to do it, right? So your must-dos are your non-negotiables. At a bare minimum, we have to deliver. This is the most business critical. This is the greatest value add, what have you. So we fully commit to everything on the must-do list. And also, we should do this other stuff, right? We should have time to do this other stuff. But if anything's going to drop, it starts from the should do. And it's so simple, but it's so powerful in its simplicity because it gives us a common framework. Okay, John, that's not on our must-do list. So here's sort of where we stand. Will we adjust the must-do list if something big comes along? Absolutely. But if we can stick to this construct of here's what we absolutely must do, let's say that's 50 to 60% of our time. We shoot for another 50 to 60% in the should do, but we've set the appropriate expectations. So we're actually striving for a stretch goal, but we've set the right bar around the delineation between must and should, which gives the team power to make those trade-offs themselves. They don't have to go ask permission to make the trade-offs. They don't have to go ask permission which thing they should work on first every single time. Those conversations do happen and they'll continue to happen. But if we set the expectation up front each quarter of what is an absolute must do, then the team feels empowered to operate independently and autonomously as they go.
I like that because I think I hear a lot of technology leaders talk about their hackathons and how they set up their team to explore. I haven't really dove into that on the data side, but it's really interesting to hear how you're trying to make a concerted effort to give them that time and plan around scheduling and give them that ability to scratch that technology itch and kind of help the team move forward down the road. I love it. That's fantastic stuff. Somebody might have a follow-up question to that one. I think that's a good one to pick your brain on, but I know you got to get back to it. And before I let you go, I was going to ask you if somebody does want to reach out and cover something that you mentioned on the show because they want more depth. They're just kind of curious to reach out. Is there a good way of contacting you?
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn anytime. Shoot me a message. I stay pretty active on at least checking my messages, even if I'm not actively posting as much as I would like. But LinkedIn, Sarah Guidry, you'll see me working at LendingTree, so you'll know it's the right one. And I'd be happy to connect and answer whatever questions your listeners have. Amir, it's been great to chat with you.
Brilliant. I appreciate that. We'll definitely been awesome to have you on and chat with you as well. And we'll include that your LinkedIn handle in the show notes so somebody can find you a little bit easier. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Two things. One, this episode's really different than a typical episode I do because I would never really talk about how the cake is made. We typically talk about stuff before, stuff after. But really diving into how we actually think about organizing the work and how to give people time, I think just don't really spend enough time on it. I actually enjoyed this conversation. So share this with somebody else who might also might be a good candidate to hear about this conversation. Also, like, subscribe, comment, leave a review. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.